You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn Company. I'm your host, Kyle MacNaught. Thanks for checking us out. So I'm sure if you're like anyone in the U.S., you've been paying attention to something, and that something has been the election. We're not going to make this sort of a punditry or anything reacting like that. Really, what we want to do is just talk about the impact that U.S. elections kind of typically have on the transportation marketplace and discuss a little bit about what this particular transition, especially within the presidency, will sort of involve and what we can kind of look forward to. So to do that, I had to bring in the man when it comes to any of this stuff, Chris Peckham, VP now of operations at Aborn. Chris, how's it going?
All right. How you doing?
I'm doing good, doing good. I mean, this is the first time in a while I've had you on, so super excited for this. At the time of recording, I'll pull up my information, but at the time of this recording, Joe Biden's more or less winning. It's kind of been called. He has 290 electoral votes with 50.8% of the population kind of voting for him. Senate looks to go to a runoff in January 5th, but currently the Republicans are controlling. They don't have a majority yet, but the runoff on January 5th in Georgia will allow us to kind of know what's happening with that. And then the House, Democrats kind of maintain the majority there. So according to my research, this is sort of the first time that the presidency and the House will be controlled by Democrats and the Republicans will more or less control the Senate within the modern age where trucks and driving and transportation. But let's just talk a little bit about what typically occurs with a transition like this. What happens when this gets flipped in a marketplace, especially in transportation?
Yeah, it's well, this is probably the most atypical transition or election that I've ever seen in my years here. And one other fun factoid about just the Electoral College in general, this is the first time since 1960 that a president didn't win Ohio and actually won the presidency, assuming that everything continues on as is. So this being really atypical, and we're going to need to speculate on things because nothing is set in stone and we still have the big COVID question out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, at the end of the day, this is probably one of the most atypical presidencies we've experienced. The whole transition is going to be crazy, everything like that. But that's kind of for context wise. What typically kind of occurs when a new president comes in place, especially within transportation, because there is downhill ramifications. What usually happens when this occurs?
Yeah, well, economically, most people right now are speculating that the economy could potentially be a little bit worse on the Biden. And where that goes is some of the tax cuts, whether you agreed with them or not, that President Trump did put in place, that spurred investment, and investment in one way or another creates jobs. Those gets repealed or raised, then that could result in some stagnant growth. Overall trade, we all are pretty familiar with the tariffs. That's all hitting our pocketbooks directly. It's reasonable to expect that trade relations with an area like the EU will improve with Biden. As we know, Trump took some very, very difficult positions with Europe overall. But historically, Biden has never gone easy with China. So I don't expect trade relations to, quote, normalize with them there. He said he's been on record saying he's not a fan of the tariffs. So, of course, there's always a chance that those end up getting repealed. But tariffs in general just don't work. They're put in place to try to reduce trade deficit and spur domestic manufacturing. And in both cases, they failed. The trade deficit with China has grown, and we have less manufacturing jobs today in the U.S. I'll caveat that by saying, of course, we're dealing with a pandemic, and some of those job losses were directly related to manufacturing. So, I want to be careful there and cognizant of all the variables that impact things that happen here. At the end of the day, though, you and I just pay significantly more for goods than what we did before the tariffs were imposed.
It's interesting too because I was reading recently just sheer amount of purchasing that's kind of going on because of the pandemic. There's no less money going into stuff like travel, like eating out and things like that. So it's really coming down to people buying stuff. So it's interesting how this is all kind of playing out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've gone from buying goods, buying services, going out to eat, going on vacations, travel in general, to just buying goods, right? And that shifted our consumer buying patterns, and that has had a direct impact on transportation and fuel overall. So from a transportation standpoint, we're seeing all-time highs in terms of container volumes coming into the U.S. From an air freight standpoint, we know that half the fleet is still grounded, so air freight pricing is still super incredibly high. With the potential vaccine that could be hitting in early Q1 or Q1 Q2, that should end up shifting consumer buying patterns back in the other direction. People are already very antsy, and you're seeing it by the rise in COVID-related cases. People have COVID fatigue. They want to go see their family. They want to hang out with friends. They want to travel. So I would expect a quick snapback when a vaccine is readily apparent to the majority of Americans, which is going to take some time. Now, having said that, with this election, there's definitely going to be an impact on fuel overall. So as everybody knows, fuel is really going to be tied to consumption. And with less people traveling, with you and I spending significantly less time in my automobile, the prices, and we'll talk diesel first, have remained incredibly low. Since April, the average monthly price of diesel is $2.42, and just this week it's at $2.38 there. You will see Biden almost immediately reinstitute some policies around fuel efficiency standards and greenhouse gas emissions. There's no question about it. There'll be a relatively negative impact on the oil, gas, fracking industries. He said that he will not eliminate fracking, but he is going to limit them. So it'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. As more people start to travel again, this is going to ease the capacity issues that we see in the air freight space. And we've talked about this at great length over the past few months. Rates are at an all-time high, and it's because available capacities are at an all-time low. As more passenger aircrafts re-enter the marketplace, that's ultimately going to drive down rates because we'll have more capacity. We expect to see some easing in Q1, Q2 of 2021. Now, if and when we get the effective vaccine, and we all read about and heard about Pfizer's announcement on Monday, which is incredibly encouraging. Like we said, people's spending patterns should shift back to more like they were before this whole pandemic started. So people go out to eat, people start traveling more, people will be spending less on the soft and durable goods side and more on the services side. So that actually translates into helping normalize the ocean and domestic trucking markets, at least to a degree. Now, it's impossible to know exactly what's going to happen, but as people buy less hard and soft goods and spend more in the services area, that is absolutely going to have an impact to help normalize ocean and domestic trucking.
It's interesting. I mean, in terms of the impact and how fast it's felt, like not COVID, but just in terms of presidents, how fast do the impact kind of how fast is it typically felt within the companies? Is it something? I mean, I know right now it's so different because the whole transition and the refusing to concede and stuff like that's going to be unprecedented. If I've heard it, I'm sick and tired of listening to it. But typically, is it something that takes a couple months to start feeling the impact from a shipper's side, or is this something that like kind of once decisions get made, you're going to start feeling it right away?
Yeah, I think it's not going to be something on day one. I mean, on day one, I think you'll see changes in environmental legislation that's not going to need Senate or House approval, and he'll reenact that. But that's not going to have a direct impact on day one. So I would expect us to feel the impacts of decisions being made by Q1, beginning of Q2. One of the things that President Trump didn't do is spend a lot or get a lot of legislation passed around the transportation budget. So there was talk of a $1.5 trillion spend, and that's 100% to work on things like the highways and the bridges in the United States that are in dire need of repair. That's something that could have been a quick and easy win that I think everybody's going to get on board with. I would expect President Biden to revisit that because that's something that I think the Senate, if it is Republican, is going to be very interested in passing as well.
It's interesting. I think the only other thing that's out there was the AB5. We know that California did vote to allow app-based drivers to be classified as independent contractors and not employees. I know we talked about this a little bit in 2019. What's the kind of play? How's this sort of gonna work into kind of those smaller truckload drivers that are more or less independent contractors?
Yeah, I can't say right now because the truckers are trying to get themselves excluded, like we just saw with Uber and Lyft. So there is Prop 22, I think that is being debated now. So they don't have a final ruling there yet. It would seem to me that if the Uber and Lyft drivers were excluded, then these guys would be too. But
Yeah,
we'll see.
yeah. It seems like there's probably more money and more kind of history too when it comes to sort of what the truck drivers and like what their setup is and everything. Plus, there's more attention on the supply chain because of COVID, so it's fascinating.
Right. Right.
I guess to wrap, we can kind of make this simple. What are some of your recommendations? What should people kind of be aware of? How do you kind of react to a transition like this or a marketplace shift like this? What should people be doing?
Yeah, selfishly, I hope folks feel comfortable to reach out to us because this is a big part of what we do. I spend an awful lot of time just researching stuff. So the folks that maybe don't have access or don't have the time to do a deep dive, they can reach out to us, and we're happy to just talk through issues. It doesn't mean that we have all the answers. It just means that we're interested in having the conversation. I would suggest that you stay as close as you can to all your transportation providers. If you have a designated sales rep, feel free to bounce all questions off them depending on the mode. I mean, they're the ones that are really living and breathing it, and they should be able to talk you through it. And as long as you have a good rep, they'll be giving you some good answers too, and not that all is doom and gloom. Because I see a potential scenario heavily tied to vaccines and when that's going to hit the majority of the states and globally too, where things can get back to a more normalized level in terms of capacity and costs for all of us. Because right now, the domestic trucking market, the LTL space, capacity is still absolutely horrible, and rates continue to climb.
Yeah, never mind that rates and all this stuff climbing, but COVID's kind of once again kind of becoming more of a hot spot, a more of things of more or less companies and places having to shut down and kind of go back into contract tracing and all that stuff. I mean, there's so much we can definitely talk about kind of in the future, especially the vaccine talk. I think that'll be fascinating. Just given your experience and kind of everything you know of how this logistically would work, how does it get around? I've already seen stuff about like cold packing and all this stuff. So there's so many questions I have for you. But yeah, Chris, I mean, thanks for quickly joining. I think no one wants to hear any more politics stuff. I think this was a very quick and easy little podcast. So if
Yep,
anyone wants
yep.
to kind of reach out to you, what's the best way?
You can get me on email, cpeckham at abornco.com. I do a really bad job of unplugging, so evenings, weekends, you can guarantee that you'll get a response from us.
Absolutely. And Chris actually also just did a really awesome webinar on small package shipping. So if you're working in that mode, it's on our resources page. It's something you definitely going to want to watch. We'll put the links and everything in the show notes. So otherwise, Chris, thanks for joining me tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely, man. Have a good day. And that's our show. How do you think the US elections is going to impact the transportation market? Let us know in the comments section, and we'll be sure to address it in our next show. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle MacNaught. Rock and roll.